As you could tell, This Must Be the Place has all the wonderful Maggie O'Farrell storytelling that you'd expect, but there's also structurally, there's so much more going on. It's multiple viewpoints, 30 years, 3 continents, 21 time zones, and absolutely no chronology whatsoever. And the other thing about it is that you never even, and this is a really, and we'll come back to this later, but you never even consider, I never even considered whether this book was written by a man or a woman. And I think that that is unusual for a publisher to let you do that. Did you intentionally want to make a leap with this book?
I don't know if it felt like a leap. I think a lot of books are a reaction to their predecessor. And the book I wrote before this, Instructions for a Heatwave, had a very kind of strict technical boundaries. It had to happen over 4 days, and it had to be in the voices of 4 people, and it had 2 very quite hermetic, claustrophobic locations. At the end of it, I just had this, I don't know what it was like a sensation. I mean, I've never worn a corset, I should preface that by saying, but it felt a little bit like ripping it off and thinking, now I can do anything. And I really had this urge to do something, just to kind of rip up the rule book in a way and do something completely different and very unfettered. I wanted to think of new ways to tell a narrative, and to try and tell, because actually the story is really about the marriage between Daniel, who you met there, and Claudette, the actress who he falls in love with and they marry. The book is mostly about, I mean, their marriage is at the centre of it, the story of their marriage, but I wanted to tell it from lots of different points of view, from their children, their stepchildren, their employees, friends, relatives, people they meet only for a minute, sort of lots of people whose lives intersect with theirs. So I wanted to kind of deconstruct and see what the novel could be capable of as in a sort of medium of its own.
Are you a planner then? Because this book it's like a big, sprawling but very intricate mind map. So did that take a lot of planning?
Well, I mean, I'm not really a planner in life, actually, or in fiction, I have to say. And I know there are writers who will plan everything very meticulously, and each chapter will have a sort of a shape to it before they even start, but I'm really not like that. So I started with the idea of this American guy arriving in rural Ireland and meeting this woman, and sort of after that I didn't really know what was going to happen, but I did. I mean, about sort of a third, well, maybe not even, about a quarter of the way in, I did think, you know, actually this book is going to be big and it's going to be very complicated, and I am going to need to plan more than I have done before. So I went out and I bought an enormous pinboard. It was huge, the ocean liner of pinboards, and lots of different coloured post-it notes, and you can tell I really love stationery in this story. Each character had its own colour, and I would sort of move them around, and the whole thing was enormous, and every morning I would stand in front of it and I would sort of think, well, maybe that chapter, what would happen to the sort of domino effect of the book if I moved that chapter here, and if the chronology is overarching, is it too, you know, and I would sort of spend ages looking at it. When I was cleaning my teeth in the bathroom, and my youngest child, who was a toddler at the time, she was probably about 1.5, she came into the bathroom with that little kind of drunken sailor walk that they have at that age, and she was saying, all gone, all gone. And I said, what's all gone? And she opened up her hand, and she had this huge ball of slightly masticated, because she had chewed it, coloured paper. And she kind of handed it to me, and I realised that she had just climbed onto my desk and pulled down every single one. So yeah, so I quite literally lost the plot that morning. The whole thing was gone.
And to talk about the chapter, which is everybody's favourite chapter that I know, the chapter where the auction catalogue of Claudette's possessions. What was the inspiration for that?
It's that sense of you can look straight at a narrative, or you can step to the side and try and look at it at a different, more oblique angle. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to find a kind of new way to tell a story, tell a narrative, or give an angle on somebody's life. Because I do think that, you know, as human beings, we're very, very complicated, very nuanced. You know, I don't think our memories and our personalities are neat, ordered and chronological and have one viewpoint and story. I think we're much more complicated than that, and I think we're much more layered human beings, and I think there's no one way to tell one story. There are 100 ways to tell it. And so I was thinking about Claudette and the idea of her leaving and running away, and what it would have been like to be left behind. You know, what would her house have looked like? I mean, she genuinely just walks out of her life one day and runs away and hides away in Ireland. And I was thinking about all the things she'd left behind, and one of my friends is an auctioneer, and I was asking him about it one day, because I said, and he said, and I said, can you show me some of your catalogues? And I was looking at them all, and I was saying to him, I don't get it. I don't understand why anybody would pay this amount of money to, you know, own, I don't know, Elvis's shirt, or I didn't really understand that. And he said, okay, I'm going to show you something. And he showed me it was in a kind of cotton, I had to put on white cotton gloves to handle it, but it was a letter from Charlotte Bronte. And it was obviously a kind of reply to a fan. It was sort of doctor somebody, and she'd written saying, "Thank you so much, I'm so glad you enjoyed Jane Eyre," blah, blah, blah. And I was holding it, and I suddenly, and he said to me, "Do you get it now?" And I said, "Yes, I do get it, I do." Yeah. And if I'd had 20 grand in my pocket, I would have handed it over to him there and then. But it was amazing, I could actually run my fingers over the ink of her signature. And there is that sense that it's a kind of collapsing down between you and this other person who you revere or you admire. You know, you can almost feel them as if they're in the room with you if you hold something that they touched. And I did think, you know, if she left, if she was as famous as I say she is in the book, people would want her stuff, they'd want her things. And maybe that's a way to tell the story.
I think as well it's about a little bit of owning a little bit of a person, isn't it? And as well as being predominantly a story about a marriage and the journey that marriage goes on. But it's also, I mean, there are many, many themes, but one of those themes is the curse of modern celebrity. Were you inspired by anyone in particular or any particular event?
Well, it's funny, I had the idea of a Claudette story quite a long time ago. It was the first piece of the book that fell into place for me. And it was when my middle daughter was really young, so it was about 7 years ago. And she was tiny, I mean, she was probably about 3 weeks old, maybe 4 weeks old. I had her in the sling. And I was in Soho, and I'd gone into a cafe to have a cup of tea, and I was thinking, as I was sitting there, I thought, there's a really odd atmosphere in this room, but I couldn't quite work out what it was, and then it suddenly hit me that opposite me at this trestle table, about as close as you are to me now, was this incredibly famous actress. I mean, so famous that she would have been known anywhere, her face was recognisable anywhere in the world. And she was right there, sitting in front of me, which was a really odd experience, because somebody who's that famous is so familiar to you, it's almost as if you think, oh, there's my friend,
yeah,
and you think, oh, no, it's not my friend. It's somebody really famous. But she looked absolutely miserable. I mean, if she hadn't been who she was, I would have said to her, are you okay? Do you need some help? Can I do something for you? And at one point, I was walking to the ladies, and she was a couple of steps ahead of me, and it was sort of walking in her slipstream that I got a kind of just a whiff or a sense of what it must be like to be her. And it was just an absolutely horrific glimpse into her life, because everybody in the room was staring at her and taking photographs on their phone. She was heavily pregnant, which I think is why she was being hounded. And outside the window were a huge bank of paparazzi all taking a photograph and banging on the window and shouting her name. And when I got to the ladies, she just had her head leaning into the mirror with her eyes closed, and she was obviously just taking a moment. She was in this tiny ladies' loo on her own. She just had a moment to kind of try to gather herself. And I just thought, I left the cafe, and as I was walking, I had to kind of fight my way through these horrible photographers. And I thought, God, if I was her, I would fake my own death and I would run away as far as I could go. And I took a few more steps, and I thought, that's a good idea for a novel.
Location's quite a big character in all your books, actually, but in this book, it's, the West Coast, the East Coast, London, the West Coast of Ireland, India, Scandinavia. You've been to all those places?
I have, actually, yeah. I mean, I do a lot of travel writing for the Times, so this is why I get to go to these exciting places. And I was in the Stockholm archipelago, it was about 3 years ago, and I kept trying to write the scene where Claudette actually disappears, where she makes her escape. And anyway, I went on holiday. I was travelling in the Stockholm archipelago. So Stockholm is this huge city, and it's got this amazing, about half an hour out you get to these islands, and it's like being in the middle of nowhere. It's an incredible city, having this archipelago. And for some reason, my youngest child got this weird sort of, it was like jet lag. She got sort of Swedish jet lag. She kept waking up at 4 a.m. So every morning we'd all been sleeping in this room. So one of us, my husband and I, would remove this very wakeful, bouncy child, and so the other two would stay sleeping, and we'd end up either trudging around Stockholm or, in the middle of nowhere. So there was one morning when I was pushing her in her pushchair around this completely deserted, tiny little island, and she did actually fall asleep at one point. So I decided, I parked a buggy on the beach and I went for a swim, and I was swimming through this completely deserted bay. And I was just swimming along, and I thought, this is where she disappears. This is it. And I thought, okay, that's it. I found the place. This must be the place. That's what I thought.